The knock on the door came just after midnight, and Alena knew before she even opened it that her life was about to change forever. 3 men stood outside, wrapped in long grey coats, their faces calm but their eyes sharp and cold. She recognized the symbol stitched on their collars at once. The council. No one from the council ever visited a house this small unless something terrible was about to happen. Alena Ward, the tallest man said, reading from a folded paper as if she were a name on a list rather than a person standing in front of him. You turned 18 today. That makes this debt due. Alena gripped the edge of the door. What debt? I don't owe anyone anything. Not you, the man said. Your mother did. Years ago, before you were born, she made an agreement with this council. A blood promise. It falls to her daughter now that she is gone. Elena's heart pounded so hard she thought the men could hear it. Her mother had died 3 years earlier, and in all that time, no one had ever mentioned a debt, a promise, or anything of the kind. She had grown up believing her mother's life had been simple and quiet, filled with nothing more dramatic than long work hours and short bedtime stories. You are mistaken, Alena said, though her voice shook. My mother would have told me. Your mother kept many things hidden to protect you, the second man said, stepping closer. That protection ends tonight. Before she could argue further, the third man placed a folded document in her trembling hands. She unfolded it with shaking fingers and read the words twice, unable to believe what they said. Her name. King Alaric Voss. A marriage arranged not out of love, not out of alliance, but out of desperation. He is dying, the tall man said quietly, as though speaking the truth might soften the shock of it. Poisoned months ago by an enemy still unknown. The healers have tried everything. Herbs, rituals, ancient remedies passed down through generations. Nothing has worked. There is one path left untried, one the old texts speak of. A true bond, formed through marriage, might slow what poison could not stop. And you chose me. Elena's voice cracked. Your mother chose you, long before you were born. We simply carry out what was promised. Alena wanted to scream, to slam the door, to run into the dark and never look back. But she knew, deep down, that wolves like these did not make requests. They made demands, and demands from the council were rarely refused twice. Within an hour, she was given no more than 10 minutes to gather her things. She took only a small bag, a warm coat, and the one photograph she owned of her mother smiling in a summer field. Everything else, her childhood bed, her books, the chipped mug she drank tea from every morning, she left behind without knowing if she would ever see them again. The carriage that carried her through the night was black and unmarked, its windows covered by thick curtains so she could not see where they were taking her. She pressed her palm against the cold glass anyway, trying to memorize the last hour of her old life. No one spoke during the journey. The silence pressed against her ears until it felt heavier than any noise could have been. By the time the carriage stopped, the sky had begun to lighten with the first grey hints of dawn. Alena stepped out onto stone ground and looked up at a fortress unlike anything she had ever imagined. Towers rose into the fading darkness, their edges sharp against the sky, and torches burned along the walls even though morning was near. This was the stronghold of the Alpha King, a place spoken of in whispers by people who had never actually seen it. A woman in a long dark dress met her at the entrance. Her expression was unreadable, neither warm nor cruel, simply efficient. You must be Alena, she said. I am Clara, head of the household staff. Come. There is little time before the ceremony. Ceremony. Elena's stomach turned. Today. Now. The king grows weaker by the hour, Clara said, not unkindly. The council believes there is no time to waste. I am sorry you were not given more warning. Truly. Alena was led through long stone corridors lit by flickering lanterns. Servants moved quickly and quietly, none of them meeting her eyes for more than a moment. She caught glimpses of worried faces, hurried whispers, and a strange, heavy sadness that hung over the entire fortress like fog. She was given a simple white dress to wear, nothing grand, nothing like the wedding gowns she had seen in old picture books as a child. There was no time for grandeur. There was only time for survival. When Clara finally led her to a set of large wooden doors and pushed them open, Elena's breath caught in her throat. The room beyond was dim, lit only by a few candles and the pale light from a tall window. The air smelled of medicine, of dried herbs burning slowly in a corner, of something bitter and old. And there, propped against a mountain of pillows on a large bed, was the king. He was nothing like the fearsome ruler she had imagined. His skin was pale, almost gray, and dark shadows circled his eyes. His body, though still tall and broad, seemed to have lost the strength that should have filled it. Yet when he looked at her, his eyes held a sharpness that startled her, an intelligence and awareness that no illness seemed able to dim. "So you are the one they dragged from her bed to marry a dying man," he said. His voice was rough, but there was no cruelty in it, only tired honesty. "I didn't have much choice in the matter," Elena said before she could stop herself. A faint, surprised smile crossed his face. "No. I imagine you didn't." "Neither did I, if it makes you feel any better. I told the council this marriage was foolish. A ritual built on old superstition. But they do not listen to a dying king. They listen to fear." Elena stepped closer, unsure why she felt drawn to do so. "Then why go through with it?" "Because a king who refuses a chance to protect his people, however small that chance may be, is not fit to be called a king," Alaric said. "Even if the chance is nothing more than a story in an old book." The healer standing quietly near the window cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, Elena, the hour grows late. If this is to happen, it must happen now." Elena's hands trembled as she was guided to stand beside the bed. A single ribbon was placed between their joined palms, a symbol of the ancient binding ritual passed down through generations of the pack. She barely heard the words spoken by the old priest performing the ceremony, her mind spinning too fast to catch every phrase. But she felt the exact moment their hands touched. A warmth spread through her palm, sudden and unexpected, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long gray winter. She gasped softly, and across from her, Alaric's eyes widened as well. For a brief moment, something passed between them, a spark neither of them could explain, neither of them had expected. The healer, who had been standing with quiet resignation only moments before, suddenly leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the small machine that monitored the king's heartbeat. His breath caught. "His fever," the healer whispered. "It's dropping." The room fell into stunned silence. Clara pressed a hand to her mouth. The old priest froze mid-sentence. Even Alaric, weak as he was, lifted his head slightly, as though sensing something shift within his own body for the first time in months. Elena looked down at their joined hands, unable to understand what she was feeling, unable to explain the warmth still tingling across her skin. Whatever this bond was, whatever strange magic the old text had promised, it was real. And it had just changed everything. Outside the chamber doors, word spread quickly through the fortress. Servants whispered to guards, guards whispered to advisors, and within the hour, the entire stronghold buzzed with a single question. Could the impossible actually be happening? Could this stranger, dragged from her home in the middle of the night, truly be the key to saving their king? Elena did not know the answer. She barely understood what had just happened to her own body, let alone what it meant for a king she had met only minutes earlier. But as she sat beside his bed, watching color slowly return to his face for the first time since his illness began, she understood one thing clearly. Her old life was gone. Whatever came next, she would have to face it standing beside a man she barely knew, in a fortress full of secrets, surrounded by people who watched her every move with a mixture of hope and suspicion. And somewhere out there, hidden among the very people meant to protect the king, someone who had poisoned him in the first place was still watching too, waiting to see if this new bond would ruin their plans for good. Elena woke the next morning in a room she did not recognize, wrapped in blankets softer than anything she had ever owned. For one confused moment, she thought the previous night had been a dream. Then she saw the ribbon still tied loosely around her wrist, the same ribbon used during the binding ceremony, and the memory of everything came rushing back. She was married. To a king. A dying king who, according to the healer, was somehow less dying than he had been the night before. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Clara entered, carrying a tray of food and a stack of folded clothing far finer than the simple dress Elena had worn the night before. "Good morning," Clara said, setting the tray down gently. "The king has asked to see you once you've eaten. He wants to make sure you understand the household before you're thrown into pack matters." Elena sat up slowly. "Is he better?" "Better than he has been in months," Clara said, though her tone remained careful, guarded. "The healers are cautious. They say it may be the bond slowing the poison, or it may simply be a temporary improvement. No one wants to celebrate too soon." After eating in silence, Elena dressed in the new clothing, still unused to the fine fabric against her skin, and followed Clara through corridors that felt slightly less frightening in daylight. Sunlight poured through tall windows, illuminating tapestries depicting wolves in battle, in celebration, in quiet moments of peace. The fortress, she realized, was not just a building. It was a story carved into stone, a history stretching back generations. She found Alaric sitting upright in a chair near the window of his chamber, a blanket draped over his legs but color visible in his cheeks for the first time. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression softened, though he quickly masked it with his usual dry tone. "You look surprised to see me sitting up," he said. "I am," Elena admitted. "Yesterday you could barely lift your head." "Yesterday I expected to die within the month," Alaric said simply. "Today, for reasons none of us fully understand, I do not feel that way. Sit. There is much you need to know if you are to survive here." Elena took the seat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "Survive? That sounds dramatic for a palace." "This is not merely a palace," Alaric said. "It is the seat of power for every wolf family in this territory. Where there is power, there are always those who want more of it. You are now my wife, which means you are also a target, whether you asked for that role or not." Elena's stomach tightened. "A target for what?" "For information. For influence. For harm, if certain people believe hurting you might hurt me." Alaric's voice remained calm, but his eyes held a seriousness that made the warning feel very real. "I would rather you understand this now than learn it the hard way." Over the following days, Elena began learning the rhythms of fortress life. Clara introduced her to the kitchen staff, the guards who patrolled the outer walls, and the advisors who met with Alaric each morning to discuss matters of the territory. Among these advisors, one man stood out immediately. His name was Henry, an older man with silver hair and a calm, steady voice, who had served as Alaric's chief advisor since before the king's own father passed the throne to him. Henry welcomed Elena with polite formality, though his eyes lingered on her a moment longer than the others, as though studying a puzzle he had not yet solved. "A pleasure to finally meet the woman who has caused such stir among the healers," Henry said, offering a small bow. "Your bond with the king is the talk of the entire stronghold." "I didn't do anything special," Elena said honestly. "I don't even understand what happened." "Understanding rarely matters as much as results," Henry replied smoothly. "And the results speak for themselves. His Majesty has not looked this strong in months." Despite his polite words, something about Henry's tone left Elena feeling slightly uneasy, though she could not explain why. She pushed the feeling aside, telling herself she was simply nervous in an unfamiliar place surrounded by unfamiliar faces. Days passed, and Elena found herself spending more time with Alaric than she expected. What began as brief, necessary conversations about pack matters slowly grew into longer discussions about history, about leadership, about the weight of responsibility he had carried since becoming king at a young age. "My father died suddenly," Alaric told her one evening, as they sat together in the quiet garden behind the fortress. "I became alpha before I was ready, before I had learned even half of what I needed to know. I made mistakes. Some of them cost lives." "That must have been hard," Elena said softly. "It taught me that leadership is not about strength alone," Alaric said. "It is about listening, about surrounding yourself with people you trust, and about never assuming you already know everything." Elena found herself drawn to his honesty, to the way he spoke without pretending to be someone he was not. In turn, she began sharing pieces of her own life, stories about her mother, about the quiet home she had grown up in, about dreams she had never told anyone else. Slowly, carefully, Something began growing between them that neither of them had expected and neither of them had asked for. But not everyone in the fortress welcomed this growing closeness. Late one night, as Alena walked back to her chamber after visiting the library, she overheard two guards speaking in hushed voices near a side corridor. She paused behind a stone pillar, listening carefully. "Healers say his strength keeps improving," one guard whispered. "If the bond truly cures him, certain plans will need to change quickly." "Quiet," the second guard hissed. "Walls have ears in this place." Elena's heart pounded as she pressed herself further into the shadows. The guards moved away before she could hear more, but the words replayed in her mind long after they disappeared down the corridor. Certain plans. What plans? And whose? She considered telling Alaric immediately, but something held her back. She had no names, no proof, nothing but a fragment of a conversation that could mean anything or nothing at all. Instead, she decided to watch, to listen, to learn more before raising an alarm that might come to nothing. The following week, a visiting delegation arrived from a neighboring park, led by a woman named Grace, whose sharp eyes and confident posture immediately set Alena on edge. Grace was polite, even charming, but there was something calculating behind her smile that reminded Alena uncomfortably of a predator sizing up its next meal. "I've heard so much about the new queen," Grace said during a formal dinner welcoming the delegation. "The one who cured the great Alpha King with nothing more than a wedding ribbon." "I don't think anyone has been cured," Alena said carefully. "The healers say it's too soon to know." "Modesty," Grace said, smiling wider. "How refreshing in someone married into such power." Alaric, seated beside Alena, offered no reaction beyond a polite nod, though Alena noticed his hand tighten slightly around his goblet. Later that evening, once the delegation had retired to their guest quarters, Alaric spoke quietly to Alena in the privacy of their shared chamber. "Grace's pack has long resented our territory's control over the northern trade routes," he said. "Her father tried twice to challenge my father's rule before I was born. I do not trust her visit is simply diplomatic." "You think she had something to do with your poisoning?" Alena asked. "I think," Alaric said slowly, "that I cannot rule anything out. Not her pack, not my own advisors, not anyone within these walls. Poison requires access, and access requires trust. Someone I trusted betrayed that trust months ago, and I intend to find out who before they succeed where they failed the first time." That night, Alena lay awake long after Alaric had fallen into a rare, peaceful sleep beside her. She thought about the whispered conversation between the guards, about Grace's calculating smile, about Henry's lingering glances. Somewhere within this fortress, someone was hiding a terrible secret, and Alena, whether she wanted the role or not, found herself determined to uncover it. She owed it to Alaric, who had shown her more kindness in a few short days than she expected from a king forced into marriage by circumstances beyond his control. And perhaps, she admitted quietly to herself, she owed it to the strange, undeniable warmth that had begun growing in her chest whenever he was near, a feeling she had not asked for but could no longer deny. The next morning, Alena decided to begin her own quiet investigation, starting with the fortress records room, where every visitor, every delivery, and every unusual event from the months before the poisoning had been carefully documented. If someone within these walls had betrayed their king, the truth had to be hidden somewhere among those pages, waiting for someone patient enough to find it. She did not yet know how dangerous that search would become, or how close the answer truly was to the people she saw every single day. The records room sat at the far end of the eastern wing, a narrow chamber lined with shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling, each one packed tightly with ledgers, letters, and raw documents tied with faded ribbon. Dust hung in the air, catching the thin light from a single high window, and the silence inside felt heavier than anywhere else in the fortress. Alena had told no one where she was going. She had learned, over the past week, that trust in this place had to be earned slowly, carefully, and given only in small pieces. Even Clara, kind as she seemed, worked within a household full of secrets, and Alena could not yet be certain who among the staff might carry word of her actions back to someone she needed to avoid. She began with the months leading up to Alaric's poisoning, pulling ledgers that recorded deliveries of food, medicine, and supplies to the royal chambers. Most entries were routine, unremarkable, signed off by kitchen staff and healers whose names she recognized from daily encounters around the fortress. But one entry, dated nearly 5 months earlier, caught her attention. A delivery of rare healing herbs, ordered not through the usual kitchen channel but directly by a senior advisor, delivered late at night rather than during normal hours. The signature at the bottom of the ledger was smudged, difficult to read, but the initials seemed to match someone she had already met. Her hands trembled slightly as she copied the details onto a small scrap of paper, folding it carefully into her sleeve. She needed more information before accusing anyone. A smudged signature alone proved nothing, and false accusations in a place like this could be as dangerous as the truth itself. Over the following days, Alena continued her quiet search whenever she found a spare hour, careful never to visit the records room at the same time twice, careful never to let her questions to household staff sound like anything more than idle curiosity. She learned that the rare herbs delivered that night were the same type used in a specific preparation known to slowly weaken a wolf's natural healing ability, a preparation that, combined with a stronger poison, could explain why Alaric's illness had resisted every remedy the healers attempted. She also learned, through careful conversation with one of the younger kitchen staff, a nervous young man named Oliver, that Henry had visited the kitchens personally on several occasions in the weeks before the king fell ill, always late at night, always alone. He said he was checking on supply counts for the council, Oliver told her quietly one afternoon, glancing over his shoulder as though worried someone might overhear. But the counts never needed checking that late. I always thought it strange, but he's an advisor. It wasn't my place to question him. Alena thanked Oliver and asked him to keep their conversation private, promising she meant no harm to anyone, only wanted to understand what had happened to the king. Oliver nodded, though fear remained visible in his eyes as he hurried back to his duties. That evening, Alena sat across from Alaric during a quiet dinner in his private chamber, watching him carefully as she considered how much to reveal. He had grown noticeably stronger over the past 2 weeks, color returning fully to his face, his voice regaining the commanding strength she imagined it once held before his illness began. Yet she also noticed the way his eyes still carried exhaustion at the end of each day, a reminder that whatever recovery the bond had triggered, it remained fragile and incomplete. "You've been distracted lately," Alaric said, setting down his fork. "Distant, even. Is something troubling you?" Alena hesitated, weighing whether to share her suspicions or continue gathering proof in silence. Finally, she decided honesty mattered more than caution. "I've been looking into your poisoning," she admitted. "Quietly, on my own. I didn't want to worry you without more information." Alaric's expression sharpened immediately, all traces of casual dinner conversation gone. "What have you found?" She told him everything, the herb delivery, the smudged signature, Henry's late-night visits to the kitchen. Alaric listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening as she spoke, his hands curling slowly into fists against the table. "Henry has served my family since before I was born," he said quietly once she finished. "He served my father faithfully for decades. I find it difficult to believe he would turn against everything he built his life around." "I'm not certain it was him," Alena said carefully. "The evidence is suggestive, not proven. But someone with access to this fortress, someone trusted enough to move freely at night without question, arranged for those herbs to be delivered. That narrows the list of possible suspects considerably." Alaric fell silent for a long moment, staring at the candle flickering between them. "If it is Henry," he said finally, "I need absolute proof before I act. An accusation against a man of his standing, without solid evidence, could tear this pack apart from within, especially with Grace's delegation still watching everything we do." "Then let me keep looking," Alena said quietly. "I'm less noticeable than you are. People speak more freely around me because they underestimate what I might understand." Alaric studied her for a long moment, concern visible behind his eyes. "I do not like the idea of you walking further into danger on my behalf." "You didn't ask me to," Alena said softly. "I'm choosing this. Whatever this bond between us has become, I won't sit quietly while someone tries to finish what they started months ago." He reached across the table and took her hand, the same warmth from their binding ceremony flickering gently between them, familiar now but no less powerful. "Be careful," he said. "Please." Alena nodded, though she already knew careful might not be enough to keep her safe from whatever waited ahead. 2 nights later, she decided to follow Henry directly, curious whether his late-night habits had continued now that the king's condition had improved. She waited until the fortress grew quiet, until most guards had settled into their evening patrol routines, and slipped from her chamber wrapped in a dark cloak borrowed from Clara's collection of household staff clothing. She found Henry exiting his study just past midnight, moving quickly and quietly through corridors Elena had not yet fully explored. She followed at a careful distance, staying close to the shadows along the stone walls, her heart pounding with every soft footstep. Henry led her through a narrow servants' passage toward the fortress's outer wall, eventually stopping at a small side door rarely used by household staff. He knocked twice, paused, then knocked once more, a clear signal meant for someone waiting on the other side. The door opened, and Elena pressed herself tightly against the shadowed corner of the passage, watching as a figure stepped forward to meet Henry. She recognized the visitor immediately, despite the darkness. It was one of Grace's personal guards, a man who had arrived with the neighboring park's delegation only weeks earlier. The herbs worked exactly as planned, Henry said quietly, his voice carrying just far enough for Elena to catch every word. Until the girl arrived. Now his strength returns daily, and I fear our window is closing. Grace grows impatient, the guard replied. She expected the throne weakened enough to challenge by now, not strengthened by some accidental bond. It is not accidental, Henry said, frustration creeping into his tone. The old texts were clear enough, though I dismissed them as superstition myself. The girl must be removed before the bond fully stabilizes, or our entire plan collapses. Elena's blood ran cold. She had suspected Henry, but hearing his betrayal confirmed aloud, hearing her own life discussed so casually as an obstacle to remove, sent a wave of fear through her chest unlike anything she had felt since the night the council first arrived at her door. How do you propose removing her without drawing suspicion? The guard asked. Leave that to me, Henry said. I have access few others possess. A private meeting, perhaps, under the guise of discussing park matters. Something quiet, something that raises no immediate alarm. Elena knew she needed to leave immediately, to bring this information to Alaric before Henry noticed her presence. But as she began stepping backward through the shadowed passage, her foot caught against a loose stone, sending a small clatter echoing through the narrow corridor. Both men turned sharply toward the sound. Someone's there, the guard hissed. Elena did not wait to see what happened next. She turned and ran, her cloak whipping behind her as she sprinted back through the servants' passage, her heart pounding louder than her own footsteps against the stone floor. Behind her, she heard Henry's voice calling out, sharp and urgent, followed by the heavier footsteps of the guard giving chase. She turned a sharp corner, nearly losing her balance, and pressed herself flat against a shadowed alcove as the footsteps grew closer. Her breath came in ragged, silent gasps as she would her racing heart to slow enough to avoid detection. The footsteps paused just beyond her hiding place. She could hear Henry's labored breathing, could sense him standing only a few feet away, scanning the darkened corridor for any sign of movement. Long seconds stretched into what felt like unbearable minutes before he finally muttered something under his breath and turned back the way he came, apparently deciding whoever had overheard them had already escaped beyond reach. Elena waited until the footsteps faded completely before allowing herself to breathe normally again. Her hands shook violently as she made her way back through the fortress's winding corridors, taking the longest possible route to avoid any chance of encountering Henry again before she reached Alaric's chamber. She found him still awake, reviewing documents by candlelight, his expression shifting instantly to alarm the moment he saw her disheveled appearance and the fear still visible in her eyes. Elena, what happened? He asked, rising quickly from his chair. It's Henry, she said, her voice trembling as she caught her breath. I heard him. He confirmed everything. He poisoned you, working with someone from Grace's park. And now he knows I overheard him. He knows someone was listening. Alaric's expression darkened into something Elena had not yet seen from him, a cold, controlled fury that reminded her, for the first time since meeting him, exactly how dangerous an alpha king could be when pushed too far. He will not touch you, Alaric said firmly, moving to stand beside her, his hand resting protectively against her shoulder. Whatever happens next, I promise you that. But even as he spoke the words, Alena understood that promises, however sincerely meant, could not undo what had already been set into motion. Henry knew someone had overheard his plans. And a man desperate enough to poison his own king would not hesitate to act quickly against anyone threatening to expose him, especially now that time had clearly begun running out. Somewhere within the fortress walls, as the candle burned low and the night stretched toward an uncertain dawn, Alena realized the true danger had only just begun. Alaric did not sleep that night. He sat awake beside Alena, watching the door, listening to every sound the old fortress made as it settled into darkness. Alena, exhausted from fear and the aftermath of what she had overheard, eventually drifted into an uneasy sleep, though her dreams remained tangled with the memory of Henry's voice discussing her removal as though she were nothing more than an obstacle on a ledger. By morning, Alaric had already made a decision. He summoned two of his most trusted guards, men who had served him since childhood, whose loyalty he had never once questioned. He explained quietly what Alena had overheard, watching their faces carefully for any flicker of surprise or discomfort that might suggest disloyalty of their own. Both men listened in stunned silence before offering their full support. "We cannot simply arrest him without proof beyond one overheard conversation," Alaric said. "Henry will deny everything, and without evidence, this becomes his word against Elena's. I need something undeniable." "What do you propose, Your Majesty?" one guard asked. "We let him believe his plan continues undetected," Alaric said. "If he intends to act against Alena, we allow him to attempt it, under careful watch, so we catch him in the act rather than relying on suspicion alone." Alena, listening from nearby, felt her stomach twist at the suggestion. "You want to use me as bait? I want to protect you completely while ensuring Henry cannot escape justice through clever denial," Alaric said gently. "You will never be alone. Guards will watch every moment, hidden but present. The instant any danger presents itself, they will act immediately." Alena did not like the plan, but she understood its necessity. Without solid proof, Henry's decade of service and reputation might protect him from consequences even after everything she had overheard. She agreed reluctantly, though fear settled deep in her chest as the day progressed. That afternoon, exactly as Alaric predicted, Henry approached Alena in the fortress garden, his expression carefully composed into polite concern. "Queen Alena," he said, offering a respectful bow. "I wondered if I might speak with you privately. There are matters concerning the king's recovery I believe you should understand, matters best discussed away from prying ears." Elena's heart pounded, though she forced her expression into calm politeness. "Of course, Henry. Lead the way." He guided her toward a quiet section of the garden, secluded behind tall hedges, far from the guards patrolling the main pathways. Alena knew, somewhere beyond her sight, Alaric's trusted men were following at a careful distance, watching every step, ready to intervene the moment danger became clear. Still, walking alone beside a man she now knew had poisoned her husband tested every ounce of courage she possessed. "You have caused quite a disturbance within these walls," Henry said once they were sufficiently isolated, his polite tone shifting into something colder, more calculating. "The king's recovery, while fortunate for him, has proven rather inconvenient for certain arrangements already in motion." "I don't know what you mean," Alena said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear coiling tightly in her stomach. "I think you understand perfectly well," Henry said, his hand slipping into his coat pocket. "I heard the commotion in the servants' passage 2 nights ago. I know it was you listening in the shadows." Alena took a careful step backward, her mind racing to remember exactly where the hidden guards were positioned. "You're mistaken." "Am I?" Henry withdrew a small vial from his pocket, the liquid inside dark and faintly shimmering in the afternoon light. "This is a much smaller dose than what I gave the king, but I assure you, it will be more than sufficient for someone your size. A tragic accident, perhaps a sudden illness overtaking the young queen. No one will suspect anything beyond misfortune." "You won't get away with this," Alena said, backing further away as Henry advanced slowly toward her. "I've gotten away with far more already," Henry said coldly. "Your death simply completes what I started months ago." Before he could take another step, a sharp voice cut through the garden air. "That's quite enough, Henry." Alaric emerged from behind the hedges, flanked by his 2 trusted guards, his expression carved from pure fury and control. Henry froze, the vial still clutched in his trembling hand, his composed mask finally shattering into raw panic. Your Majesty, Henry stammered, this is not what it appears. I heard every word, Alaric said, his voice deadly calm. I trusted you for decades, Henry. My father trusted you before me. And you repaid that trust by poisoning me, by conspiring with a rival pack against my own throne, and now by threatening my wife's life in broad daylight. Henry's eyes darted between Alaric and the two guards blocking his only path of escape. Desperation flickered across his face as he realized the trap that had closed around him. You don't understand the pressures of holding this territory together, Henry said, his voice rising with panic. The council grows weaker each year, rival packs grow bolder, and you, forgive me, Your Majesty, but you were young and untested when your father died. I believed, truly believed, that a change in leadership might strengthen us against threats you could not yet see. So you decided murder was an acceptable solution, Alaric said coldly. I decided survival required difficult choices, Henry snapped back, his composure crumbling entirely. Grace's pack offered an alliance strong enough to secure this territory for generations. All I needed was a weakened throne willing to negotiate terms. And when that weakened throne began recovering, Alaric said, you decided murdering my wife would solve your problem. Henry said nothing, his silence confirming everything Alaric needed to hear. The guards moved forward immediately, restraining Henry before he could attempt any further action, the small vial of poison falling from his hand and shattering against the garden stones. Alena released a breath she had not realized she was holding, her legs suddenly weak with relief now that the immediate danger had passed. Alaric moved quickly to her side, his hands gentle despite the fury still visible in his eyes moments earlier. Are you hurt? He asked urgently. I'm fine, Alena said, though her voice still trembled slightly. Frightened, but fine. You were incredibly brave, Alaric said softly. Walking alone beside a man you knew intended harm, trusting that I would protect you in time. I trusted you completely, Alena said. That trust wasn't misplaced. As guards led Henry away toward the fortress's holding chambers, word of his betrayal spread rapidly through the stronghold. Servants whispered in shocked disbelief, advisors gathered anxiously to discuss the implications, and by evening, the entire pack understood that their trusted senior advisor had orchestrated a plot against their king for months. Grace's delegation, upon hearing news of Henry's capture and confession, departed the fortress abruptly before dawn the following morning, offering no formal explanation beyond vague diplomatic excuses. Alaric made no attempt to stop their departure, understanding that direct accusations against a neighboring pack's leader without absolute proof would only invite further conflict he could ill afford while still recovering his full strength. That evening, as the fortress finally settled into a quieter rhythm following the day's dramatic events, Alena sat beside Alaric in his private chamber, both of them emotionally drained from the confrontation. I keep thinking about how close we came to losing everything, Alaric said quietly, staring into the fireplace. If you hadn't investigated, if you hadn't overheard that conversation, Henry's plan might have succeeded completely. I would have died believing my closest advisor remained loyal until the very end. But it didn't happen that way, Alena said gently, reaching for his hand. Whatever this bond between us is, whatever strange fate brought us together, it worked exactly when we needed it most. Alaric turned to look at her, something warm and unguarded visible in his expression for the first time since she had met him. I did not expect, when the council forced this marriage upon us both, that I would come to feel anything beyond gratitude toward you. Yet here I am, feeling something far deeper than simple gratitude. Elena's heart fluttered at his words, the warmth of the bond between them flickering gently once more, familiar now but no less powerful than that first moment during their binding ceremony. I feel it too, she admitted softly. Somewhere between the fear and the danger, something real grew between us. Outside their chamber window, the fortress settled into peaceful darkness for the first time in months, free from the hidden threat that had lingered within its walls since Alaric's mysterious illness began. But Alena understood, even as relief washed over her, that Henry's confession had revealed only part of a larger conspiracy. Grace's pack remained a threat beyond these walls, their ambitions for the northern trade routes far from abandoned simply because one conspirator had been captured. Whatever peace they found tonight, Alena suspected, might only be temporary, a brief calm before whatever storm Grace's pack intended to bring next. 3 days after Henry's capture, a messenger arrived at the fortress gate just before dawn, breathless and pale, carrying news that shattered the fragile peace Alena and Alaric had only just begun to enjoy. Grace's pack had gathered a force along the northern border, far larger than any diplomatic delegation required, positioned dangerously close to the disputed trade routes Henry had mentioned during his confession. Alaric received the news standing in the Great Hall, surrounded by remaining advisors who had proven their loyalty beyond question during the chaos of the past week. His expression hardened into the calculating focus of a leader preparing for conflict rather than the gentler warmth Alena had grown accustomed to seeing in private moments between them. They intend to force the issue now, while they believe our pack remains weakened by scandal and recovery, Alaric said, studying a map spread across the long table. Grace assumes Henry's capture has left us vulnerable, without clear leadership or unified support. What will you do? Alena asked, standing beside him despite the tension radiating through the room. I will show her exactly how wrong that assumption is, Alaric said firmly. Over the following 2 days, the fortress transformed from a place of quiet recovery into a hub of careful preparation. Guards trained in the courtyard from dawn until dusk, advisors coordinated supply lines and defensive positions, and messengers rode swiftly between allied packs seeking support against Grace's growing aggression. Alena found herself drawn into these preparations more deeply than she expected, offering insight from her own careful study of pack politics during her weeks investigating Henry's betrayal. You understand people better than you realize, Alaric told her one evening, reviewing strategy alongside his remaining advisors. Your instincts about Henry proved correct when experienced advisors overlooked the danger entirely. I want your perspective on how Grace might react to different approaches. Alena felt a swell of pride at his confidence in her judgment, a feeling entirely different from the fear and uncertainty that had defined her first days within these walls. She had arrived here as a frightened stranger forced into an unwanted marriage, and now, weeks later, she found herself contributing meaningfully to decisions that would shape the future of an entire territory. On the third morning, word arrived that Grace herself intended to meet Alaric directly, proposing a formal negotiation rather than immediate conflict, though the underlying threat of her gathered forces remained clearly implied. Alaric agreed to the meeting, understanding that avoiding direct confrontation, when possible, remained preferable to the loss of life a full conflict would bring to both packs. The meeting took place at a neutral clearing along the border, guarded heavily by soldiers from both sides but conducted with the formal politeness expected between rival leaders. Alena insisted on accompanying Alaric, refusing to remain safely behind fortress walls while he faced potential danger alone. I won't hide why you negotiate the future of our territory, she told him firmly when he suggested she remain behind. Whatever this bond has become between us, it means facing challenges together, not separately. Alaric relented, understanding the determination in her voice matched his own growing respect for her courage. Grace arrived at the clearing dressed in formal attire, her expression carefully composed into diplomatic calm, though Alena noticed the same calculating sharpness in her eyes that had unsettled her during their first meeting weeks earlier. Your Majesty, Grace said, offering a shallow bow. I trust you've recovered fully from your recent illness. Fully enough to recognize exactly how that illness began, Alaric replied evenly. Henry's confession named your pack's involvement quite clearly. Grace's composed expression flickered only slightly. Accusations from a captured traitor desperate to shift blame carry little weight, Your Majesty. Perhaps, Alaric said. Yet your forces gathered along my border immediately after his capture suggest otherwise. If your intentions remain purely diplomatic, such a display of military strength seems curiously timed. The tension between them stretched taut as both leaders measured each other carefully, neither willing to reveal weakness before the other. Alena watched closely, remembering everything she had learned about pack politics during her weeks of careful study, searching for any opening that might diffuse the growing conflict without bloodshed. Your pack has long resented our control over the northern trade routes, Alena said suddenly, stepping forward despite the surprised glances from both sides. Perhaps this conflict need not center on conquest or revenge, but on genuine negotiation. What if those routes were shared, rather than controlled entirely by either territory? Grace turned toward her, surprise visible beneath her careful composure. You suggest compromise, Queen Alena. I suggest avoiding a conflict that costs lives on both sides when a solution benefiting everyone remains possible, Alena said steadily. Your pack wants economic security. Ours wants to maintain sovereignty over our own territory. Shared access to the trade routes, with clear boundaries and fair taxation agreed upon by both parties, could satisfy both goals without further bloodshed. Alaric glanced at Elena, clear surprise and growing respect visible in his expression, before turning back to Grace. My wife raises a reasonable proposal. I am willing to discuss terms, provided your forces withdraw from the border immediately as a demonstration of good faith. Grace studied both of them carefully, weighing the offer against whatever ambitions had driven her pack's aggression in the first place. Finally, after a long moment of consideration, she nodded slowly. I will bring this proposal to my own advisors. Perhaps there is wisdom in avoiding unnecessary conflict, particularly when a mutually beneficial solution exists. The negotiations that followed over the next several days proved difficult, filled with careful compromise and occasional tension, but ultimately successful. Grace's forces withdrew from the border, formal agreements were drafted regarding shared access to the northern trade routes, and what had threatened to become a devastating conflict between two powerful packs instead resolved into a fragile but genuine peace. Henry, meanwhile, faced formal judgment before the full council, his confession providing clear evidence of his betrayal against the throne he had sworn to serve. Elena felt no satisfaction in witnessing his punishment, only a quiet relief that the danger threatening Alaric's life, and her own, had finally been resolved completely. With both the immediate threat from Grace's pack and the internal betrayal from Henry finally addressed, the fortress settled into a period of genuine peace unlike anything Elena had experienced since her arrival. Alaric's health continued improving steadily, the poison's lingering effects finally clearing completely from his system as the bond between them grew stronger with each passing week. One evening, several weeks after the crisis had fully resolved, Alaric led Elena to the same garden where Henry had once threatened her life, though now the space felt entirely transformed, filled with blooming flowers and warm evening light rather than fear and danger. I've been thinking about our binding ceremony, Alaric said, taking her hands gently in his own. How rushed it was, how neither of us had any real choice in the matter. You deserve better than a hurried ritual performed out of desperation. I don't regret how it happened, Elena said honestly. Even rushed and forced, it brought us together in ways I never expected. Still, Alaric said, I would like to offer you something different now. A choice, freely made, rather than one forced upon us both by circumstance and old superstition. He knelt slowly before her in the garden, his expression open and vulnerable in a way Elena had never seen from him before, not even during his weakest moments of illness. Elena Ward, I am asking you now, not as a desperate king seeking a cure, but as a man who has come to love you completely. Will you choose to remain my wife, freely and completely, knowing everything about who I am and everything this life demands? Tears filled Elena's eyes as she looked down at him, remembering the frightened girl who had been dragged from her home only weeks earlier, forced into a marriage she never wanted with a man she had never met. That girl could never have imagined standing here now, choosing freely what had once been forced upon her, feeling genuine love for a man who had shown her strength, honesty, and unwavering respect throughout their difficult journey together. Yes, Elena said, her voice steady despite her tears. I choose you, Alaric. Completely and freely. Their renewed vows, performed simply within the garden days later, carried none of the desperate urgency of their first binding ceremony. Instead, the ceremony reflected genuine choice, genuine love, and a partnership built through shared hardship rather than forced circumstance. The council, once dismissive of Elena's worth beyond her usefulness as a potential cure, now recognized her fully as the queen who had helped save their king, exposed the dangerous conspiracy, and negotiated peace with a hostile neighboring pact through wisdom beyond her years. Clara, standing among the gathered witnesses, wiped tears from her eyes as she watched the ceremony conclude. I've served this fortress many years, she told Elena afterward. I have never seen our king look so genuinely happy. I never imagined finding happiness here either, Elena admitted, glancing toward Alaric as he spoke warmly with advisors nearby. But sometimes, the paths we never choose lead us exactly where we are meant to be. As the fortress settled into a new era of stability and genuine partnership between its king and queen, Elena often thought back to that terrifying night when the council first arrived at her family's small home, delivering news that had upended her entire world without warning. She could never have imagined, standing frightened in her doorway that night, that fate would lead her toward genuine love, meaningful purpose, and a partnership stronger than any forced arrangement could have created. The territory prospered under their combined leadership, the trade agreement with Grace's Park bringing genuine economic benefit to both sides, while internal reforms following Henry's betrayal strengthened trust between the throne and its people. Alena, once a frightened outsider forced into an unwanted role, became known throughout the territory as a wise and courageous queen who had faced impossible circumstances and emerged stronger, wiser, and genuinely happy. And whenever anyone within the fortress asked how their king and queen had found such genuine love despite beginning their marriage under such desperate and unwanted circumstances, Alena would simply smile and remind them that fate often works in mysterious ways, weaving even the most difficult beginnings into stories of unexpected happiness, if given enough patience, courage, and willingness to fight for what truly matters.